17 minutes, 7,000 corpses. On September 7th, 1191, on the baked sand north of Arsuf, the myth of Saladin's invincibility met a European king who refused to break trumpets, split the heat, destriers thundered, and a red lion banner carved a corridor through panic. Then, rewind. You don't understand that blast of steel unless you know the week that primed it. 2 months earlier, Acre fell, July 1191, after a siege that ate men, money, and patience. Disease had thinned Crusader ranks. Faction had done worse. Philip II of France took his laurels and sailed home, leaving Richard I of England, brilliant, impetuous, terrifyingly brave, holding a victory that bled across the line. Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Saladin, still controlled Jerusalem and most inland strongholds, his field armies replenished by Egypt and Syria. The Third Crusade hung by a thread. Richard's strategy turned on logistics, not legend. March 160 kilometers down the coast from Acre to Jaffa, seize the port, then contemplate Jerusalem with a supply base and a sea bridge at his back. That meant a moving fortress, not a gallop. Infantry in a box. Genoese and Pisan crossbowmen posted in teeth-like intervals. Spearmen ready to brace. Within the shell, the armored cavalry. Templars leading the van. Hospitallers guarding the rear. To seaward, a fleet crawling in step to feed water, grain, bolts, and spare mounts. Orders were iron. No one charges without the king's signal. Richard knew Saladin wanted anger more than ground. Saladin obliged with mastery. He would not offer a decisive field where Frankish lances could decide the day. He shadowed the column with Mamluk and Turkoman horse archers. Gallop in, swarm with arrows, peel away. At intervals, sudden rushes of Nubian and Bedouin infantry to test the shell. Heat turned mail into ovens. Thirst gnawed. For 6 straight marching days, 30 August to 5 September, taunts and shafts rained on the rear guard. Hospitallers bled. Knights begged to be unleashed. Richard said no. The refusal was the point. Medieval heavy cavalry lived to explode. Spurs, couched lances, impact. Richard inverted instinct into discipline. Keep formation, trust the crossbows, trade space for time. The fleet's slow, stubborn shadow kept canteens from turning to dust. Wagon masters and surgeons did quiet heroics. Chaplains muttered prayers over men who collapsed from sun and fear as much as from wounds. Saladin kept tightening the vise, feeding in fresh units from the hills, probing for one torn seam. The killing ground chose itself. South of Arsuf, pine and scrub pressed the road into a narrow shelf between forest and sea. Perfect for Saladin's culminating blow. Dangerous for any army that could be goaded into disorder. Richard saw the terrain and did what he had done all week. He held. The Hospitallers, flayed by arrows at the rear, gripped their reins and waited for a signal that did not come. 17 minutes would become legend. But the legend breathes because of the week before it. Because one king made thousands do the hardest thing in war, endure. Next, 7 days of thirst and fury. The march that forged the explosion at Arsuf. Acre falls. Christendom falters. 1191. 2 years, and the sea stank of rot. From August 1189 to July 1191, Acre was a millstone hung on both armies' necks. Famine ate the garrison and the besiegers in alternating bites. Dysentery turned tents into infirmaries. Summer killed as reliably as steel. Saladin's banners ringed the city from the hills. Crusader camps and wooden towers ringed it from the shore. Between them, Acre, a prize and a grave. The siege was a lesson in stubborn engineering. Pisan and Genoese ships muscled through blockades to choke the harbor. Sappers pushed galleries under walls while defenders, countermined by lamplight, trebuchets, traded names and insults across the battlements. When Richard I landed in June 1191, fevered but ferocious, his carpenters and engineers raised fresh engines and bombardments that never slept. Philip II of France brought weight and money. Together they squeezed the city's last breath, while Saladin's relief attacks hammered their perimeter. Sometimes he broke in, never through. Inside the Christian host, unity cracked faster than stone. Guy of Lusignan and Conrad of Montferrat contested a crown, while starving men contested scraps. The military orders, Templars and Hospitallers, kept discipline with iron prayers. German contingents mourned the drowned legacy of Frederick Barbarossa. Lesser lords argued over precedence and rations. Priests processed relics. Surgeons boiled knives. Quartermasters counted rancid grain. And every morning, the same horizon. Walls still standing. Graves multiplied. On the 12th of July, 1191, Acre capitulated. The terms were grand and precise. Ransom payments staggered over months. Prisoners exchanged by tallies and sharpest claws. The return of the relic of the True Cross captured at Hatton flags changed on the gate. Silence fell like a verdict. Then bargaining, inventory, and the rancor of victors who had little strength left to celebrate. The city had been taken, but the army that took it was bled white. Philip decided the arithmetic. With Acre secured and his health and politics at home pressing, the French king announced his departure. He left money, siege engines, and a promise thinner than parchment. He took with him prestige, counselors, and a share of authority Richard could have used. Christendom's spear was now a single arm. Richard remained with a diminished, fractious host. English, Angevin, Norman, Poitevin, Flemish, Italian sailors, Syrian Franks, the orders, men who respected his courage and feared his temper, united mostly by necessity. Across the hills, Saladin still held Jerusalem, Ramla, Lydda, Arsuf, and the spine of fortresses that fed his armies from Egypt and Syria. Acre's fall was a bruise, not a break. The Sultan's coalition still had horse, grain, bows, and time. He intended to spend them slowly. Richard read the ledger and chose movement over monument. March south along the coast, seize Jaffa, let the fleet shadow the column, and refuse every trap that smelled like glory. Acre had proved one thing brutally: victory without logistics is a rumor. The crusade would live or die on discipline, water casks, and a king's ability to keep hot blood cold. The march begins. Wolves on the hills, August 30th to September 6th. Dawn bled into metal. On August 30th, 1191, the army filed out from the safety of Acre's walls and settled into the discipline that would decide if it lived. Sea on the left, supply ships ghosting the surf, hills and dust on the right, where horse archers waited like weather. Richard set the formation and nailed it there. Vanguard, Templars and picked infantry. Center, the king's banner, the heavy cavalry regiments leashed tight. Rearguard, Hospitallers under strain. Around all of it, a moving carapace of spearmen and pavis-bearing crossbowmen, Genoese and Pisan, posted in alternating files so bolts could fly while the spears kept riders off baggage mules, marched inside the shell. Water carts hugged the shore. Trumpets and handbells carried orders. No one mistook improvisation for courage. Saladin's wolves came with the heat. Turkoman and Mamluk riders materialized on the ridges, cantered in crescent arcs and salted the column with arrows. The tactic was old and perfect. Never close, never rest. Needle the nerves until pride did the work. Drums thudded from the high ground. Reed pipes poured scorn. The hiss of fletching became a second sun, every mile the same. Peppering rushes at the flanks, a feint at the baggage, a sudden silence that felt like a promise, and wasn't. Richard's order was iron and simple. No one charges. Knights who had trained their whole lives to explode forward rode in bit-chafing silence beside the king's standard. The infantry did the killing that counts on marches. Shields up, bolt, step, shields up, bolt, step. Crossbow crews knelt to span, rose to fire, and ducked as the spears leaned out to break any rider who dared the line. When the wind shifted, sailors in ships' boats ferried skins of water ashore, the only sweetness in a day of salt and iron. Men drank by measure, horses by mercy. The heat made honest men cruel. Armor burned, leather bled dye into skin, thirst put sand in every sentence. A Templar in the van counted the deaths by sound. First the whistle, then the dull knock of a shaft in wood, then the different, uglier sound when it found meat behind. The Hospitallers took the brunt, absorbing each swirl and peppering retreat with bolts, until the bowstrings soured from sweat. Their Grand Master sent pleas for a free hand. The answer came back the same each time. Hold. Saladin adjusted the screw. Columns of smoke rose from burned orchards inland. Flocks were driven off, wells fouled. The Sultan's aim was not annihilation, but provocation. If he could pry a single regiment loose, 10, 50, 100 knights surging after insult, the trap would close on sand and distance. Instead, the column moved like a siege engine that had learned to walk halt at noon for a tight lager meal. Move again under shields. Camp in hedgehog squares with ditch and rope. Set night watches by hourglass and star. By September 6th, the men were ghosts inside their harness, but the line had not broken, and the fleet still shadowed the march with water and bread. In the hills to the right, the harassment thickened and began to cohere. Less teasing, more weight. The ground ahead opened into a narrow plain between woodland and sea. Saladin's staffs marked it on their maps. So did Richard. The wolves were done, circling. The pack meant to bite. Order against instinct. The caged lions. They moved like a fortress dragged on hooves. Templars set the point of the spear, grim, tight, their white mantles soot-streaked. Hospitallers guarded the hinge and tail where every feint turned to pressure. Between them stretched the engine Richard had built for surviving wolves, a shell of spearmen with interlocked shields, ranks of Genoese crossbowmen in alternating files, one line loosing, the next spanning, so the air never quite emptied of bolts. Inside the shell, like lightning corked in a bottle, rode the heavy cavalry. Angevin and Poitevin, Norman barons, English household knights, war-educated their bones to charge. Now the king told them to choke that lesson down. Saladin's staff understood appetite, harass to heat, taunt to rage, then make space where discipline collapses into valor. Kill valor. Turkoman and Mamluk riders flowed in and out of range, kneeling backward on saddles to shoot, wheeling to pepper the flanks, then melting uphill before a counter-thrust could form. Drums hammered the heart rate. Reed horns sawed at the nerves. One moment, a feigned rout to suck a few hotheads outward. The next, a sudden mass on the baggage to trigger panic. Always the same goal. Pry a plank from the Roman-style hull and let the sea in. Richard denied the sea. He rode the line with his marshal and standard, measuring distances like a master mason. How far a horse can surge and still come home under bolts. How close to let the skirmishers bite before the spears must bristle. Orders traveled by horn and flag. Steady pace, no pursuit. Water by measure, spans in rotation. Crossbow crews cycled like clockwork. Kneel, hook, span, rise, shoot. While sergeants counted bolts and bodies with the same flat voice. When a sector sagged, the king shifted weight. 2 maniples of spears here, a company of dismounted knights there, plugging leaks before they were rivers. Instinct bucked under the saddle. The Hospitallers in the rear took the worst of it. Arrow hail, swirling charges, mock retreats that snapped back like traps. Twice, messengers rode to the king. "Sire, our horses fall under us. Give us leave to strike." And twice the answer came iron. "Hold the line." A Templar captain watched a youth crumple with a shaft in the eye and chewed the inside of his cheek until it bled. Honor said, "Ride." Arithmetic said, "Live." Richard made arithmetic a virtue. Saladin tightened the vise, shifting the archers closer, bringing heavier contingents down from the ridges to force the shell to flex. Fires crawled over orchards inland. A line of smoke walked beside the Christian column like a mirror. Yet the formation held its grammar. Shields and pavises outward, bolts forward, cavalry silent at the core. Knights who had measured themselves by lone thunder learned a new courage. To kill by patience, to save by not charging. By week's end, both plans had ripened. The Sultan had identified the hinge he meant to snap. The Hospitaller rear on ground hemmed by woodland and sea. The king had marked the same ground for a different purpose. A killing floor where the enemy must finally come close. Caged lions paced inside the shell. The keeper held the key. Arsuf set, forest, shore, and a kill box. September 7th, 1191. The road pinched to a throat where map and will would decide the day. To the right lay the Mediterranean, bright, implacable, a wall of water that fed the column from the fleet. To the left, the Sharon forest pressed close. Dunes giving way to scrub and pine, broken by hollows perfect for a sudden flood of horse. Between sea and trees ran a narrow rib of firm ground curving south toward Arsuf there, on a strip no wider than a few hundred paces. Richard meant to make Saladin come close enough to be punished. Formation was the weapon. Templars led, Hospitallers guarded the rear, and between them marched a double shell. Spearmen and pavisiers outside, Genoese crossbowmen staggered in depth behind them. Then the heavy cavalry bottled in the core, Angevin and Norman lances, English household knights, French captains who had stayed when Philip sailed. Trumpets and pennons carried orders. Water and bolts were rationed like oaths. The king rode the interior line with his banner, checking intervals the way a ship's master eyes his rigging before a storm. Saladin massed to break the stern geometry. His light horse veiled the ridges. Behind them, in ordered echelons, waited heavier contingents, Ghulam guards and picked emirs, ready to convert panic into rout the moment a gap opened. The plan was the same as all week, only larger. Heat the shell with arrows and charges until instinct burst through discipline. But the ground altered the math. To the right, the sea denied encirclement. To the left, woodland blocked a broad sweep. The kill box ran both ways. It could hold the Franks if they cracked. It could trap attackers if they came too close and stalled under bolts and pikes. Morning opened with a drum roll of arrows. Turkoman and Mamluk riders flowed in crescents along the column's landward face, loosing at a distance that mocked pursuit. Crossbow files answered in cadence. Front rank shoot, second rank span, third rank step in. So the answer never stopped. When skirmishers probed the flanks, sergeants coolly knelt their men. bristled the spears and let the first rush die on wood and iron. The Hospitallers bled the worst of it, horses collapsing in harness, grooms hauling wounded into the shielded corps, captains riding the rear edge like sailors on a breaking stern. Richard's restraint looked inhuman because it was deliberate. He kept the column moving, slow even, indifferent to insult, to deny Saladin the stillness where archers harvest. When a sector thinned, he shifted weight without spending cavalry. A wedge of dismounted knights here, a surge of crossbow files there. Twice messengers begged leave to charge. Twice the answer was no. He was not hoarding courage. He was buying position. By midday, the Sultan committed more weight, pressing in with infantry and close horse to crush the Hospitaller hinge before the Franks cleared the narrowest bend. The air turned to dust and drum. The line bowed, but did not break. Richard watched for what he had built the box to force. A moment when attackers, packed by their own momentum between forest and sea, must halt and bunch within killing distance. When that moment came, one exploitable beat where restraint could become thunder, he would spend everything at once. The break, Hospitallers snap, and history tilts. It began where pressure was greatest, at the rear, where the Hospitallers had walked a week inside a hail. Midday sun hammered helm and mail, horses steamed and stumbled, Turcoman arrows pecked joints and reins, Mamluk lancers probed for a seam. The rearward shell, Pavisias and spearmen with Genoese crossbow files stepped back to back, bent until every order sounded like blasphemy against survival. Hold, hold, hold. Then a single nerve parted. A Hospitaller marshal, chroniclers name Baldwin of Caron, others point to the Grand Master Garnier of Nablus, saw a squire fold with a shaft through the eye and a destrier go down screaming under him. The next volley rattled off peltas and coifs. The next drum roll came closer. He stopped being an officer and became a blade. With a shout pitched between prayer and oath, "St. George!" he spurred straight through the cordon, his bannered retinue on his stirrups. The black mantles flared. The rear gate blew open. Contagion is the quickest language in war. 2, 10, then a score of knights burst after him, first from the Hospitaller line, then from nearby squadrons whose mounts were already dancing under the lash of arrows. The perfect geometry Richard had husbanded all morning cratered in an instant. The column's tail surged, the shell gaped, crossbow cadence wobbled as files split to let lances through. On the ridge, Saladin's captains waved their men in, now, to hook that gap and roll the column against the sea. Richard saw it like a chart collapsing. He had less than a breath to choose between doctrine and rescue. Obey himself, keep the center and van locked, let the rear die to preserve the army, and the Hospitallers would be swallowed or redraw the battle in a heartbeat. He did not weigh long. He raised his sword and slashed it toward the sky. A single brazen note shook the air. Trumpets up the line repeated it. Templar, Angevin, Norman, Poitevin, until the whole formation rang. Standard bearers wheeled out. Captains kicked free of the shell. Sergeants yanked pavises aside to open lanes. The bottled thunder in the column's core finally moved. The first shock was like weather changing. Templars in the van lowered lances and slammed into the archers who had crept too close under a week's impunity. The mid-column squadrons angled left to pin riders against the scrub edge. The Hospitallers, no longer alone, hit the very men who'd been butchering their grooms moments before. The Genoese answered on cue. 2 quick salvos into the enemy's second line as the knights burst past, then shouldered forward to seal the column's flanks, turning the gap into a hinge rather than a wound. Saladin's plan flipped on its fulcrum. What should have been a piecemeal massacre became a synchronized detonation. His horse archers, too close to disengage, found themselves toe-to-toe with couched ash wood and iron. His heavier guards, surging to exploit the breach, met formed lances at a gallop in a corridor no wider than a city street. The kill box he had chosen began to kill the men inside it, and the charge he had spent a week baiting arrived not as panic, but as judgment. 17 minutes. 17 minutes. The span between restraint and ruin. Once the trumpets loosed the column, weight and reach decided everything. The Frankish heavy cavalry, Templars in the van, Hospitallers and Angevin French squadrons abreast, hit the forward Saracen infantry screens like a falling gate. These were not levy mobs, but hardened foot. Sudanese, Bedouin, Syrian, meant to soak a charge while horse archers shredded the flanks. They never got their rhythm. Lances took men at brace height. Shattered ash shafts turned to bludgeons. Maces finished what iron had started. The screen collapsed not by yards, but by seams, opening lanes that grew into breaches. Behind them, the Mamluk and Turkoman horse had crowded too near, fattened for a week on impunity. Skirmishing doctrine, flow in, sting, flow out, needs space. There was none. Destriers, the weight of small siege engines, punched into light Arab and Turkic mounts at full tilt. Curved sabers that ruled the chase were wrong tools in the crush. Kite shields became traps for couched lances. Bowstrings that had sung for 6 days had no time to sing once a cloud army met a wall. Richard rode with the surge, not ahead of it, standard to his right, Danish axe slung and sword working. He directed angles more than lines. Templars to drive straight, Hospitallers to sheer left toward the forest margin, Poitevins to rake the coastal flat and keep the column's hinge shut. Each impact created a pocket. Each pocket drew more horse archers inward. Each inward step stole them skirmish distance. The Genoese crossbowmen paced the churn, halting to throw dense, timed volleys into second waves, then jogging to close the gaps the knights left behind. Infantry spearmen, shields overlapped, kept the corridor to the sea intact, so the release did not become a rout forward. Saladin's best were not fools. The core of his guard, picked Mamluks under emirs who had seen Hatton and more, kept formation and yield. They attempted the doctrinal answer, absorb the first blow with forward elements, pivot fresh files onto the exposed Christian flanks, then scissor the overextended lancers. But overextended never arrived. The Franks struck and reformed in ripples, not a single drunken wave. When the guard committed, they found not scattered pairs of knights, but renewed wedges, lances swapped for swords and rondel daggers working under mail. The guard disengaged in good order, intact, but with the shock that comes when a blade meets bone. It expected to be wax. 17 minutes measured the rest. Infantry screens pulped, horse archers ridden down before they could unspool, mid-tier emirs unhorsed, standards lost in the dust. Chroniclers tally roughly 7,000 Saracen dead. Even if ink argues, the ground does not. Richard's losses were light by proportion. Hundreds, not thousands, though among them fell men whose names peopled half of Europe's courts. When the horn on Saladin's hill called recall, it was not surrender. It was refusal to waste the one coin left, his guard and the army's nerve. He pulled them back in bands, veiling the retreat with archery and dust. The field belonged to the Franks. The war Not yet. But a myth had bled out in the sand, and everyone on both ridges knew it. Victory's razor edge. Triumph has a habit of opening its own trap. The charge that tore Arsuf open also tore the Frankish line apart, flinging squadrons inland in 100 private hunts. Knights who had been iron statues for a week suddenly remembered they were predators. The coastal corridor, the artery that kept horse and foot stitched, thinned to a thread, Richard pressed with the forward mass, the Red Lion bobbing in a storm of dust, until the storm clarified into danger. The Sieglint was gone on his left. Crossbow calls were behind him, and the ground under his horse was the wrong kind. Broken scrub, shallow gullies, the belt of forest where Mamluk horse could bend and vanish. From Saladin's ridge, the opportunity was clear. The Sultan had not spent his last coin. His household guard and chosen regiments from Aleppo, rested and still in good order, rode down in a lacquered curve to the king's exposed flank. Not a rout chase, but a methodical scythe. Short sprints, arrow bursts at knee height, quick wheel, lances probing for reins and gaps in mail, a geometry designed to cut a leader out of his men. Richard's destrier took a shaft in the neck leather. A second skittered off the king's hauberk rings. Axes and sabers rang at arm's length. The standard dipped and surged. For a breath, the battle narrowed to one life. A king on foot in churned sand, helm dark with sweat, shoulders braced, drawing a circle of space with the axe's low, ugly arc. Guillaume de Bar saw it first. French, proud, as often rival as ally. Whatever spites had simmered during the siege of Acre boiled off in an instant. He rallied the nearest French and Templars into a flying wedge and cut clean across the Mamluk ring, not to kill, but to open time. Saddles collided, a banner staff snapped, a riderless horse barreled through like driftwood in a flood. Debarras reached the Red Lion, shouldered the king toward a fresh mount, and the wedge reversed through the gap it had made, swallowing blows meant for one man. It was not pretty. It was enough. Rescue buys seconds. Command turned seconds into shape. Richard found height, lifted his sword, and did the thing that separates a charge from a rout. He called the army back to itself. Standard, the one word that means form on me, not on your fury. The Genoese halted and block-printed order with bolts. Punching space into the melee spearmen stepped up in ranked chevrons. The knights reformed by banners rather than instincts. Templars on the shoreward hinge. Hospitallers at the forest lip. Poitevins in the seam. All facing outward like a door just shut. Saladin read the door and chose not to test it to splinters. He veiled the field with archers and dust, drew his guard back intact, and saved his army's will for the long game he preferred. Richard did not squander daylight on spectacle. He policed the killing ground, pulled the wounded to the surf, scavenged arrows, water, and horses, and reknit the column. Cavalry caged again inside infantry, crossbows pacing the flanks, fleet abreast to feed the march. Arsuf had given him leverage, not an ending. He used it the Roman way, by moving south along the coast, step by disciplined step, toward the prize that mattered more than piles of corpses. Jaffa, the key to supply, winter quarters, and any honest talk of Jerusalem. Aftershocks, what Arsuf changed and didn't. 17 minutes rewrote rumor into fear. Along the coast, watchtowers that had sworn by Saladin's name began whispering a different one. Melek Arak, the king of fire, the Frank whose charge did not stop garrisons that had strutted, now counted ladders. Caravans detoured at the sight of a Red Lion pennon. When Richard took Jaffa days after Arsuf, gates opened faster than envoys could rehearse their courtesies. The psychological currency flipped. Men who had boasted of Jerusalem now spoke of the English king as if he were a weather event. But terror is tinder, not timber, and Saladin still owned the forest. The Sultan's guard had withdrawn intact. His brothers and emirs still had cadres that would reform around a banner, and a drum council in the Ayyubid tents turned from break them to bleed them. Lesson 1 from Arsuf: never again offer the Franks a long, clean field. Lesson 2: starve the iron animals before they bray. The order went out across Palestine: pull grain behind walls, lift mills' stones, drive herds inland, salt or foul the wells on the inland roads, strip villages of timbers that might become siege frames. Paths were left, water was not. Ascalon, hinged between Egypt and Syria, became a case study in denial. Too valuable to lose, too risky to hold against Frankish cavalry, its walls were dismantled stone by stone under Ayyubid overseers. Towers came down, ditches filled with rubble, gates unseated. Any harbor that could make a siege short was to be made long. Gaza's works were slashed. Ramla and Lydda's approaches were rendered thirsty. Inland castles were scorched of fodder and stripped of roof beams. Orchards were felled so that shade itself would be rationed. Richard answered by turning victory into geometry. The coast became a chain. Tyre, Caesarea, Arsuf, Jaffa, garrisoned, victualled by sea, stitched by patrols and beacons. Genoese and Pisan hulls shuttled grain and crossbow strings. Engineers opened cisterns and bridged marsh. Surgeons and chaplains made the new logistics of endurance. The king rode inland in razzias when maps and water allowed, burned granaries when he found them, and punished forays that ventured close to his corridor. But he would not be lured far. Saladin's horse still owned the long, dry middle. The army's rhythms changed. Ayyubid columns harassed at dawn and dusk, never committing enough weight to be pinned. Their horse archers kept just outside quarrel range, daring the Franks to waste strength in sprints that armor hated. When Richard baited with small detachments, the Sultan declined. When Richard massed, the landscape itself refused. Stony gullies, blind rises, dust that burned throats and bowstrings alike. Panic after Arsuf had been costly. Patience promised profit. So Arsuf shattered a myth but did not end a calculus. Saladin seeded the spectacle, the set piece where destriers could run, but kept the strategy. Deny water, deny fodder, deny wood, and force the lion to march by the surf forever. Richard, for his part, had proved the charge and learned the price. He would build, bind, and wait for a crack he could trust. Between them lay Palestine, newly quieter, newly harsher, a campaign turned from thunder to attrition. Jerusalem, twice in sight, twice denied. Winter, 1191 spring, 1192. Victory at Arsuf did not open Jerusalem. It opened a ledger. Every mile inland had to be purchased with water, fodder, carts, and days the army could not spare. Through autumn, Richard rebuilt Jaffa and began restoring Ascalon's torn shell. Saladin had raised its walls stone by stone to deny precisely what Richard needed: a southern anchor against Egyptian relief. Then the rain came. The Levantine winter of 1191 to 1192 turned tracks into glue, tents into sponges, men into coughs. Dysentery ran the ditches. Pack animals died faster than replacements arrived off the ships. Still, the council marched. In January 1192, Richard advanced to Beit Nuba, roughly 12 miles from Jerusalem, close enough that men swore they could see the city's hill line when the weather cleared. The knights of the temple and the hospital, who knew this ground like accountants know margins, made the case no poet wants to hear. Assault was possible. Holding was not. Saladin had stripped the approaches bare, orchards cut, wells fouled, cisterns capped, and garrisoned every track with mobile horse. If the Crusaders took the city, every Ayyubid in Syria and Egypt would close like a fist. A besieged garrison would starve while relief from the coast crawled through mud under arrow shadow. Politics pressed as hard as mud. Philip II had sailed home. French contingents muttered about terms and pay. German numbers, shaken since Frederick's death, were thin, and letters from the West cut through armor. John was maneuvering in England, Philip courting allies in Normandy. Richard could win a wall or lose a crown. He held a cold council in the rain. The verdict, by grim majority, fall back to the coast, finish Ascalon, and build a fortress chain that could support either a spring campaign or a negotiated end. Saladin felt the knife as well. He could not risk a ruinous set piece outside Jerusalem, yet he could not abandon it. He kept his cavalry in the lattice between city and sea, harrying foragers, burning fodder, and, when Richard withdrew to the littoral, demolishing again what work the Franks had raised. The war turned into a surveyor's argument. How many towers could be finished before disease or a raid stopped the mortar from setting? In April, the baronial feud in the Latin states burst. Conrad of Montferrat, newly elected in Tyre, was murdered. Guy of Lusignan's claim flickered and went out. The crown of a state that barely existed became another distraction. Even so, by early summer, Richard tested the road again, pushing inland a second time. The distances repeated themselves. Beit Nuba, patrols within view of the ridge, reports of wells dry and cisterns guarded. The orders repeated too. Stand to, count grain, and listen to the men whose job was to say no. He chose strategic sobriety over glorious folly, turned his back on the skyline, and returned to the only plan that could still pay. Hold the coast, finish Ascalon, keep the army alive, and force Saladin to bargain. 2 approaches, 2 retreats, not cowardice, but arithmetic. Jaffa, from the sea, the Red Lion walks on water. July-August 1192. The city fell while Richard was already northing his sails. Saladin's columns ringed Jaffa in late July. Miners tore at the footings, and a storm of mangonel shots unstitched the patched walls. The garrison, thin, sick, and short of bolts, was driven back, street by street, into the citadel. Banners burned on the quays. Word found the king on the water. Jaffa taken, survivors cornered, massacre beginning. Advisors counseled prudence, save the fleet, husband the remnant, except that the campaign had ended on a beach. Richard answered as if the sea itself had spoken, where mail, clear decks, turn about. At dawn, a handful of transports hove to opposite a shore, black with Ayyubid spears. The surf carried the smell of pitch and ruin. Richard did not wait for staging ramps. He stepped over the gunwale in full harness, the Red Lion standard at his shoulder, water to his chest, salt in the rings of his hauberk, and waited for the sand. For a heartbeat, the line facing him hesitated. Stories travel faster than orders. Then the arrows came. Behind the king, ship captains shoved skiffs forward. Genoese crossbowmen splashed down, cranked in the foam, and began to reap. Knights and sergeants followed, dragging bucklers and spare cords for the bows. The landing became a wedge. Crossbow volleys blistered the closest ranks. Pikemen planted ash shafts like a hedgehog. Richard drove at the seam where celebrants had become soldiers. Again, the beach broke. A door opened into streets, still choked with smoke and bodies. Fighting from wharf to market, the king's party burst through to the citadel gate, where the last defenders, breathless, blood-wet, stared as the man from their oaths appeared with seaweed on his greaves. The gate swung. The trapped became a garrison again. Taken in the back, Saladin's storming parties recoiled out of the town, leaving piles of gear and the dead they hadn't yet stripped. Then came the decision. No manual recommends. Instead of flooding the breaches with men and mortar, Richard walked his standard back through the postern and pitched a camp on the open ground between Jaffa and the Ayyubid host, a deliberate island of stakes, shields, and discipline. Ditches were scratched, mantlets planted, pavises propped shoulder high for the Genoese. Spears were driven butt first into earth, heads canted forward to meet horses. The message was the tactic. Not come and try the wall, but come and try us. On 5th August, the answer arrived as thunder. Mamluk and Turkoman squadrons came in layered waves, lances couched, bows singing. The first shock met quarrels at 30 paces and fell on pikes. The second found the ground already slick. The third punched a gap. There Richard stood, fighting afoot in the press, blade and spear trading rooms in his hands, until the hedgehog closed again. Charge after charge collapsed on the same iron geometry. Bolts, poles, knives. By afternoon, the plain quieted under a new kind of silence. Jaffa's beach held. The camp still bristled. The red lion still flew. Against every counsel of caution, a king had landed with hundreds against tens of thousands. And by daring the assault, he seemed least able to survive. Taken the city back. 7 waves, then silence. Peace at Jaffa. September 2nd, 1192. They came in 7 waves and left only dust. On the flats outside Jaffa, after the beachhead miracle and the night march into the citadel, Richard did the unthinkable. Drew his little army out from the stone and planted it on open ground. Pikes rooted, shields locked, Genoese windlasses cranked tight. He stood forward with the standard, mail black with brine and blood, refusing the horse to share the footing of his men. The Mamluk and Turkoman squadrons formed by the thousands, hooves drumming like rain on a roof. And then the first wall of riders broke from the line. The geometry was brutal and simple. When the distance closed to murder, the crossbows spat iron, short heavy bolts that punched through quilted coats and lamellar both faltered mounts, slammed into the hedge of spears. Fallen horses made instant ramparts. The front rank finished work with sword and mallet. The first wave recoiled. The second wave found worse ground. The third drove deeper, splintered ash poles, and for a breath, the hedgehog gaped. Richard stepped into the seam, a man where a palisade should be, swinging the long axe that had already earned a name. The gap congealed, and the fourth wave met timber and will where it had hoped for air. 5, 6, each charge slightly more ragged, each retreat a little slower. Bowstrings thrummed over the Frankish shoulder. Pavises creaked. Sergeants cursed men back into line. The 7th wave started with the old confidence and ended in an eerie slackening, horses bunching at the sight of their own dead. When it ebbed, the field gave back the sound of breath again. Around the Red Lion, the square still stood. Saladin had measured the army that morning and by dusk had taken its measure again. He retained veterans, cities, and the Holy Hill. He lacked a lever to pry this king off the sea, Richard had broken the trap at Arsuf, saved a beach with 80 riders, and now held a meadow with 2,000. Yet Jerusalem, visible on clear days from Frankish patrols, remained beyond logistics, and weather endurance had fought audacity to a draw. So the messengers went instead of fresh drums. On September 2nd, 1192, terms cooled the metal. A truce of 3 years and some months. The coast from Tyre through Jaffa in Frankish hands. Ascalon's walls to remain down. Inland roads watched by the Sultan's emirs. Most crucially, unarmed Latin pilgrims under safe conduct to visit the Holy Sepulchre and the other sanctuaries of the city that neither side could force the other to yield. The clauses were practical, not poetic. Freedom of markets, exchange of captives, oaths by cross and by Quran. And they worked because both armies were tired and both commanders were honest about it. The two men never met face to face. They traded physicians, fruit, snow, and threats. They answered each other with marches and with mercy. One left crowned by a battlefield, the other by a city that had outlasted storms. Legend called both unbeaten. History called the truce at Jaffa what it was. A silence earned by 7 charges, held by a square around a king, and signed by rivals who understood the limits of steel.